Hello everyone, this is Albert. I just want to have a quick little discussion on the issue of the Filioque. For those unfamiliar with that, in the what's commonly called the Nicene Creed, actually a creed that was formed at the Councils of Nicea and Constantinople, which is the standard creed of the Church. In the original, where it says the Holy Spirit, and I believe in the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father. Later in the West, there was added the clause "and the Son," so it becomes, and I believe in the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father and the Son. This has become an issue between the Eastern and Western churches. In fact, it certainly became an issue at the time of the split between the Orthodox, what would become the Eastern Orthodox and what would become the Roman Catholic churches, and in the 11th century and later. Although it had actually arisen in the Western Church sometime probably 6th or 7th century, I'm just sort of estimating here, in Spain, it wasn't Spain at the time, I think it would have just been called Iberia, and spread, but by the time of the split it had become fairly standard in the Western Church, and the Eastern Churches at the time of the split seized upon this as pointing to the errors of the Western Church, just as the Western Church would point to certain things in the East as being their errors, and so what may have been tolerated before suddenly becomes hot issues. And at this point, it's one of the things that any reunion has to deal with. And so what I wanted to discuss is exactly what's correct or what's incorrect or how they're interpreted. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to just go back and say, well, this is the history of it, and obviously somebody did or did not make a mistake or whatever, because it really doesn't matter at this point. It's kind of crying over spilt milk. I do think that it was actually and at least initially certainly was an unauthorized addition to the creed that spread, and after the split actually became canonized in a sense by Roman Catholic councils, where they became basically the new creed. They updated the creed in that fashion. Certainly the East would not accept that, and there are reasons, but I think what happens now is that since the die was cast, both sides have gone about defending their particular views, and what I find is that although none of the views are necessarily incorrect as they stand, what they really do are, at this point, they're answering different questions. And I'll say there are basically three views. One, I would say the Orthodox view, the Eastern Orthodox view. Then you also have the Catholic view and the Protestant view of things. Or I shouldn't say, because it's not necessarily official, but the standard lines of defense for their particular views. The Protestant Catholic obviously holding the "and the Son," and the Orthodox disputing it. In terms of the normal Catholic defense, and it's not the only defense, but it's the one I see the most among Catholic apologists, is the mystagogical approach. Basically sees the Holy Spirit as an embodiment of the love between the Father and the Son, and hence proceeds from the Father and the Son. And you see this sort of mystagogical ideas within certain early church fathers in both East and West, so it has some history to it. But it's not really the question they were answering at Nicea, although you could say legitimately in terms of if the Holy Spirit embodies the love between the Father and the Son, in that sense, that mystagogical sense, he proceeds from the Father and the Son. But that's not really the question they were answering in Nicea and Constantinople. Also, in the Protestant approach, and this is since evangelicals really don't deal that much with Nicene Creed or anything like that. They generally don't say creeds, but I'm thinking more in terms of Reformed Protestants, who usually do the most apologetics from the Protestant side. They tend to see things, as one might expect, being primarily Calvinists, in soteriological terms, and salvation issues. And the whole thing there is Jesus sent the Holy Spirit. He sent Jesus sent the Holy Spirit, and Jesus only does the will of the Father. So it's the will of the Father that the Holy Spirit was sent, so therefore proceeds from the Father and the Son. And the issue here is, once again, that this is not really what the Creed was talking about either, because the Creed was not dealing with sending in time, in terms of, it was not dealing with salvation issues. It was dealing with the eternal nature of the Trinity, which was you have to realize in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, that whole period, the issues were not mystagogical, they were not soteriological, they were ontological. And that's why the Creed was constructed the way it was. And in fact, if you look at the passage where Jesus sends the Holy Spirit, he says, and I will send the Holy Spirit, when he says he will send the Holy Spirit, he says, who proceeds from the Father. So right away you see the distinction there. Sending is not the same thing as proceeding from. And in fact, the procession was seen to be eternal, that the Holy Spirit eternally proceeds, just as the Son is eternally begotten, that in fact the Father is although all are co-eternal, the Father is the source of the Trinity, and the Son is eternally begotten, and the Holy Spirit eternally proceeds. And that the question of the creeds were in fact ontological questions, not mystagogical or soteriological questions, and therefore, at least this would be the standard Eastern interpretation, I think, within the context of the time the creed was designed, when the creed was formulated. The Orthodox interpretation is in fact the correct one. I do think the and the Son, as I mentioned, in terms of mystagogy, if you understand it, give it a different interpretation, it can in fact be considered correct, but it really is not what the creed was talking about originally. So I would certainly have no objection in any proposed reunion of dropping that clause. I don't think it's really a major, for me it's not a major issue, for others it may be, but I think it's more because they either don't understand the issue, or they're just a force of habit, or they sort of defending saying and the Son because that's what they've always said. But in terms of the original intent of the creed, what's actually the creed is talking about, you would have to go with the Orthodox view. And in fact, if you were to reinterpret the creed in that way, it automatically brings into question how you're interpreting the parts about the Father and the Son, since they're all ontological. So how do you deal with that? And you suddenly have this like one part on the Holy Spirit that's different than the parts on the Father and the Son, that you're not speaking of ontology now, and so I think that's an issue. I think in terms of the original intent, the Orthodox interpretation is in fact the correct one, and would be the preferred one. Although I would certainly give in any proposed reunion of churches give the option, just simply because of the traditions that have involved the music and whatever, to allow for the Filioque clause, given but understanding it in a different way. Somehow the theologians would have to work that out, exactly what goes on there. But I think the standard creed should be without the Filioque. Well, that's my 2 cents worth, and thank you very much for your time.